Deep in the Kepler sector, floating like a metallic corpse among the asteroid debris, sat what remained of an ancient Earth vessel. The ship had been drifting for who knows how long, its hull scarred by centuries of micrometeorite impacts and cosmic radiation. To most species, it would have been just another piece of space junk. But to the crew of the research vessel Prudent Inquiry, it was the find of the century. By the 7 moons of Arcturus, whispered Dr. Crix, his 4 eyes practically bulging out of his purple elongated skull. It's actually real. An authentic human vessel from the primitive era. Commander Vorp, a stocky gray-skinned Zaltharian with the personality of a military regulation handbook, adjusted his scanner with practiced precision. Confirmed. Carbon dating suggests this wreck is approximately 500 standard years old. The cryogenic systems appear to be functional. Functional. Nixel, their orange-scaled tech specialist, looked up from her console with the kind of expression reserved for discovering your lunch has been replaced with recycled air filters. You mean there's actually something alive in there? The 3 aliens stood in their pristine white research bay, staring at the scans of the derelict human ship. According to their historical databases, humans had been one of the galaxy's more pathetic species. Soft, weak, short-lived creatures who barely managed to crawl out of their gravity well before mysteriously vanishing from known space. They were the kind of species that made excellent case studies in evolutionary dead ends. Just one life sign. Crix continued, his excitement palpable. A perfectly preserved human specimen. Think of the research opportunities, the cultural insights, the academic papers I could publish. Vorp frowned, which on a Zaltharian face looked like someone had folded a piece of origami incorrectly. The regulations clearly state that awakening unknown cryogenic subjects requires approval from the Galactic Ethics Committee. That process could take months. Or Nixel said with the tone of someone about to suggest something spectacularly stupid. We could just defrost the thing and ask it some questions. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's just a human. The phrase just a human would later be remembered as one of the most tragically ironic statements in recorded galactic history. But at that moment, surrounded by their advanced technology and centuries of supposed superiority, it seemed perfectly reasonable. Dr. Crix was practically vibrating with scientific enthusiasm. The specimen would be an invaluable source of information about early human culture, and according to our records, humans were remarkably docile, cooperative, even. They spent most of their time staring at small rectangular devices and consuming processed nutritional paste. Plus, Nixel added, running a claw along her control panel, our containment systems are rated for Class 12 predators. Even if this human turns out to be aggressive, which is highly unlikely given their species' historical timidity, we could subdue it with a standard neural dampener. Vorp considered this for exactly 37 seconds. Which was precisely how long it took for his career-focused brain to calculate the potential academic and military benefits of being the first to successfully study a living human. Very well, he decided, sealing their fate with bureaucratic efficiency. Prepare the revival chamber. But I want full containment protocols in place. And someone check the historical files one more time to make sure humans don't have any surprising defensive capabilities. As the 3 aliens began preparing to wake up their harmless specimen, none of them bothered to check the timestamp on their human cultural database. If they had, they might have noticed that their information was from the year 2157, back when humans were still figuring out basic space travel. They definitely would have wanted to know what humans had become by 2089, just before they mysteriously disappeared from the galaxy entirely. But ignorance, as they say, is bliss. At least until you defrost something that can bench press your entire spaceship. The revival process took exactly 43 minutes and 17 seconds. The aliens watched through reinforced observation windows as the cryogenic pod hissed open, releasing 5 centuries worth of freezer burn into their sterile air filtration system. Inside the pod, looking remarkably well preserved for something that had been a human popsicle since the late 21st century, was Jake Morrison. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, with the kind of build that came from years of manual labor and a complete ignorance of what kale was supposed to be good for. Fascinating, Dr. Crix whispered, making notes on his tablet. The specimen appears to be in perfect physical condition. Notice the muscle development. Quite impressive for such a primitive species. Jake's eyes fluttered open, and he sat up with the slow, deliberate movements of someone whose last memory involved being told he had about 30 seconds to get into a freezer before the ship's reactor went critical. He looked around the pristine white chamber, took in the 3 bizarre alien faces staring at him through what looked like bulletproof glass, and came to the most reasonable conclusion possible. Well, he said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that only comes from a lifetime of dealing with construction site emergencies. This is either the weirdest hospital I've ever seen, or I'm not in Kansas anymore. The aliens exchanged excited glances. It could speak. And in perfect galactic standard, no less. Their translation systems were working flawlessly. "Greetings, human specimen," Commander Vorp announced through the intercom system, consulting his first contact protocols manual. "You are aboard the research vessel Prudent Inquiry. You have been in cryogenic suspension for approximately 500 of your years. Please remain calm and do not attempt any sudden movements." Jake scratched his head, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both confusion and complete unconcern. 500 years. That explains why I feel like I could sleep for another week. He glanced around the containment chamber, noting the thick walls and the small viewport. "So, I'm guessing you folks aren't human." "Correct," Dr. Crix chimed in, barely containing his scientific enthusiasm. "We are researchers studying extinct civilizations. Your species disappeared from known space centuries ago. You may be the last of your kind." "Last of my kind," Jake repeated, processing this information with the same expression most people reserve for being told the coffee machine was broken. "Well, that's a hell of a thing." He stood up, stretching muscles that hadn't moved in 5 centuries, and immediately bumped his head on what the aliens had assumed was a generously high ceiling. The sound of Jake's skull hitting the reinforced metal was like a gong being struck by a sledgehammer. "Ow," Jake said mildly, rubbing his head. "You guys build everything kind of low, don't you?" What happened next would later be described by Commander Vorp as the first indication that our containment protocols might be inadequate. Jake, still rubbing his head, absent-mindedly, grabbed the support beam he'd just hit to steady himself. The beam, constructed from military-grade durasteel and rated to withstand direct hits from plasma cannons, crumpled in his grip like a piece of aluminum foil. The aliens stared in stunned silence as Jake looked down at the twisted metal in his hand with the expression of someone who'd just accidentally broken something expensive. "Oh crap," he said, "sorry about that. I'll pay for that." He attempted to bend the beam back into shape, which only made things worse. "Man, they really don't make stuff like they used to, do they?" Dr. Crix's tablet slipped from his suddenly nerveless fingers. Commander Vorp's regulation manual fell to the floor with a thud. Nixel just stared, her orange scales turning a pale yellow color that in her species indicated either extreme fear or the onset of molting season. Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd just casually destroyed something that should have been physically impossible for him to damage. "I don't suppose you guys have a bathroom, and maybe some coffee? Because 500 years is a long time to go without caffeine, and I'm starting to get a headache." The 3 aliens looked at each other, then back at Jake, who was now examining the containment chamber's walls with the professional interest of someone who'd spent his career in construction. "Also," Jake added conversationally, "you might want to upgrade your building materials. This stuff seems pretty flimsy." 20 minutes later, after what could generously be described as the most awkward first contact in galactic history, Jake found himself in the ship's main laboratory. The aliens had decided that keeping him in the containment chamber was pointless, partly because he'd asked so nicely to be let out, and partly because he'd accidentally punched a hole through the wall while trying to lean against it. "Now then, Doctor," Crix said, his voice carrying the strained cheerfulness of someone trying very hard not to panic. "We'd like to run a few simple tests to better understand human physiology. Nothing invasive, of course. Just some basic physical assessments." Jake, who was currently trying to sit in a chair designed for beings considerably smaller than himself, nodded agreeably. The chair creaked ominously under his weight, despite being made from the same durasteel that he'd previously crumpled like tissue paper. "Sure thing, Doc, though I should probably warn you, I'm not exactly in peak condition. Haven't hit the gym in, well, 500 years. He gestured to his stomach with a self-deprecating grin. "I've probably lost a lot of muscle mass." Nixel, who was monitoring the structural integrity of everything in the room, made a strangled noise that might have been laughter if it hadn't sounded so terrified. "Let's start with something simple," Commander Vorp suggested, producing what looked like a futuristic grip strength tester. "This device measures physical force output. It's calibrated for our strongest warriors." The galactic record holder, a Kruntak battle champion, registered 412 standard units. Jake took the device, which immediately began beeping warnings about excessive grip pressure. "Neat gadget," he said, giving it what he considered a gentle squeeze. "How's this?" The device exploded. Not metaphorically, it literally exploded into a shower of sparks and twisted metal, as if someone had fed it into a wood chipper operated by an angry god. Jake stared at the smoking remains in his hand. Was it supposed to do that? Dr. Krex's left eye began twitching, a nervous habit he'd developed during his doctoral thesis on extinct civilizations. No, he said faintly. No, it was not supposed to do that. Maybe we should try the physical agility test. Nixel suggested with the desperate optimism of someone trying to convince themselves that things couldn't possibly get worse. The agility test involved navigating an obstacle course designed to challenge the reflexes and coordination of elite military personnel. It included laser barriers, moving platforms, and walls that required significant upper body strength to climb. Jake approached the course like a tourist examining a mildly interesting museum exhibit. The first obstacle was a series of laser barriers that required precise timing and flexibility to navigate. Jake simply stepped over them. The lasers, which were positioned at what the designers considered an impossible height for most species, passed harmlessly beneath his knees. Huh, he said. You guys are pretty short, aren't you? The second obstacle involved climbing a sheer wall using handholds spaced for maximum difficulty. Jake grabbed the wall and pulled himself up in one fluid motion, accidentally tearing the handholds clean out of their reinforced mountings. Whoops, he said, holding up a handful of twisted metal. Sorry about that. I think the screws might be loose. The final obstacle was a locked door that required either a complex electronic key or enough brute force to overcome military-grade security systems. Jake tried the handle, found it locked, and gave it what he considered a gentle push. The door, along with most of the surrounding wall, collapsed into the next room. Well, Jake said, stepping through the Jake-shaped hole he'd just created. That was fun, though you might want to talk to whoever designed this course. The difficulty level seems a bit low. The three aliens stood in stunned silence, surrounded by the wreckage of their supposedly indestructible testing equipment. Dr. Krex was making notes on his tablet with the frantic intensity of someone trying to document the apocalypse. Commander Vorp was flipping through his regulation manual, looking for a protocol that covered what to do when your test subject accidentally destroys your entire laboratory. Nixel was running structural diagnostics on the ship's hull, suddenly very concerned about whether their vessel could handle having Jake aboard. This is impossible, Dr. Krex muttered. According to our records, humans are supposed to be physically inferior to most galactic species. They're described as soft, weak, and primarily dependent on primitive tools for survival. Jake, who was now trying to help clean up the debris and accidentally reducing most of it to powder in the process, looked up with interest. Oh, those old records. Yeah, that was before the enhancement programs. Genetic modification, cybernetic integration, environmental adaptation, all that stuff. Pretty much every human got the basic upgrades by the time I was born. He paused thoughtfully. Though I guess that makes sense why you thought we were weak. That's like judging sharks based on goldfish. Enhancement programs, Commander Vorp repeated slowly, as if the words were in a language he'd never heard before. Sure, Jake said cheerfully, accidentally crushing a piece of debris to dust between his fingers. Standard stuff. Bone density enhancement, muscle fiber optimization, neural processing improvements, toxin resistance, radiation shielding. Nothing fancy, just the basics to survive in space. He gestured around the laboratory, with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. You guys must have some pretty impressive modifications yourselves to build a ship like this. What kind of enhancement programs do your species have? The three aliens looked at each other with the dawning realization that they might have made a very, very serious mistake. We don't, Nixel said weakly. We don't have enhancement programs. Jake's expression shifted to one of polite confusion. Oh, huh. So you're all, completely natural? No modifications at all. Correct. And you went into space anyway. Jake's tone carried the same incredulous respect most people reserve for hearing about someone who'd climbed Mount Everest in flip-flops. Man, that's either really brave or really stupid. Probably both. As if to emphasize his point, he accidentally leaned against a support beam, which immediately bent at a 90-degree angle. Oops, Jake said. Sorry, I'll try to be more careful. While Jake wandered off to find what he optimistically called the little alien's room, the three researchers huddled around their central database terminal like survivors around a dying fire. The atmosphere in the research bay had shifted from scientific excitement to the kind of barely controlled panic usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. Pull up everything, Dr. Crix commanded, his four eyes darting frantically across multiple screens. Every file, every fragment, every footnote about human civilization. Cross-reference with galactic military databases, archaeological surveys, even the children's educational programs. There has to be something we missed. Nixel's claws flew across her keyboard with the desperate efficiency of someone trying to defuse a bomb. Our primary human database is from the Terran Colonial Survey, dated 2157, early space age, pre-enhancement era. Her orange scales had gone completely pale now, giving her the appearance of a very worried traffic cone. But look at this. I'm finding scattered references to something called the Human Expansion Period, starting around 2400. What kind of references? Commander Vorp demanded, still clutching his regulation manual like a security blanket. Mostly redacted military files and hazard warnings. Nixel replied, her voice growing smaller with each word she read. Listen to this. Advisory to all shipping lanes in sectors 7 through 12. Human territorial space is hereby classified as a no-entry zone until further notice. Any vessels approaching human-controlled systems will be considered acts of aggression and dealt with accordingly. This is from the Galactic Maritime Authority, dated 2847. Dr. Crix felt his stomach performing what could only be described as advanced acrobatics. Keep reading. Here's another one. Nixel continued, sounding like someone reading their own obituary. Emergency Session Minutes, Galactic Defense Council. Topic: The Human Problem. Recommendation: Complete non-engagement protocol. Human military capabilities have exceeded all predictive models. Suggest immediate reclassification from Level 3 civilization to. She paused, staring at the screen. To what? Vorp practically shouted. To Apex Predator Species. Class Omega. Nixel's voice was barely a whisper. With a footnote that says recommend avoiding contact unless absolutely necessary for survival of civilization as we know it. The three aliens sat in stunned silence, punctuated only by the distant sound of Jake cheerfully humming something that sounded suspiciously like an Earth construction work song. Occasionally, there would be a loud crash followed by Jake's voice calling out, "Found it." Sorry about the wall. Dr. Crix buried his face in his hands, which was quite a feat considering he had 4 of them. What else? Please tell me it gets better. It gets worse. Nixel replied with the tone of someone delivering news about terminal illness. Much worse. Here's a cultural analysis report from the Arcturus Institute. Human society appears to be built around the concept of competitive destruction. They refer to their recreational activities as extreme sports, which involve launching themselves off cliffs, diving into water from impossible heights, and something called parkour, which seems to be the art of treating any environment as a personal obstacle course. That doesn't sound so bad, Commander Vorp said hopefully. They do this for fun, Nixel emphasized. For entertainment. Their idea of relaxation is to put themselves in mortal danger and see if they can survive it. And according to this report, that was before they started genetically modifying themselves. Another crash echoed from somewhere in the ship's depths, followed by Jake's voice. Hey, do you guys have any duct tape? I think I might have fixed your plumbing a little too enthusiastically. Dr. Crix was now reading over Nixel's shoulder, his scientific curiosity warring with his survival instincts. Look at this military assessment from the Third Galactic War. It says here that a single human battalion was responsible for ending a conflict that had been raging for 37 years. They didn't negotiate a peace treaty. They didn't find a diplomatic solution. They just showed up. Showed up, and did what? Vorp asked, though his expression suggested he really didn't want to know. According to this, they politely asked both sides to stop fighting. When the warring factions refused, the humans demonstrated what they called aggressive peacekeeping. They systematically dismantled every weapon, every ship, and every military installation belonging to both armies, with their bare hands, in 3 days. But that's impossible, Vorp protested weakly. No species could single-handedly end a galactic war. The report includes video footage, Nixel said, her voice now resembling that of someone announcing the end of the world. Want to see? They really didn't want to see. But like drivers passing a catastrophic accident, they couldn't look away. The video showed what appeared to be a peaceful garden world, torn apart by decades of warfare. Burning cities, scarred landscapes, massive military installations bristling with enough firepower to crack continents. Then, a small fleet of human ships arrived. Not an armada. Not a battle group. Just 12 ships, each about the size of the vessel they were currently on. What followed could only be described as the most polite apocalypse in recorded history. Humans in simple work clothes walked through active battlefields like they were strolling through a park. Plasma cannons that could melt through battleship armor bounced off them harmlessly. They picked up tanks and gently set them aside. They tied artillery pieces into decorative knots, When soldiers tried to shoot them, the humans would walk over, take the weapons away, and very patiently explain why violence wasn't a good solution to their problems. "Dear merciful Cosmos," Dr. Crix whispered. "They're not just strong, they're completely invulnerable." "Keep watching," Nixel said grimly. The video showed a human woman, who couldn't have been more than 5.5 feet tall, having what appeared to be a friendly conversation with a Krelthan warchief. The warchief, a creature that resembled a cross between a rhinoceros and a very angry mountain, was known for being able to headbutt through starship hulls. The conversation lasted about 30 seconds before the warchief apparently said something rude. The human woman sighed, reached out, and picked up the 8-ton warchief like he was a misbehaving house cat. She then carried him over to what appeared to be a corner of the battlefield, and very gently set him down in what could only be described as a timeout position. "She's treating a galactic-class war criminal like a toddler having a tantrum," Commander Vorp observed faintly. "And it worked," Nixel added. According to the report, both sides surrendered within the hour, and signed a permanent peace treaty. They were apparently too embarrassed to keep fighting. Just then, Jake's voice echoed through the ship's intercom system, which he had apparently figured out how to use. "Hey guys, I found your engine room. Good news is, I think I can improve your fuel efficiency by about 40%. Bad news is, I'm going to need to rebuild most of your propulsion system. Also, do you have any sandwiches? All this excitement is making me hungry." The three aliens looked at each other with the dawning realization that they weren't just dealing with a human. They were dealing with what amounted to a walking, talking, cheerfully destructive force of nature, who considered rebuilding their starship's engine to be light entertainment. "There's more," Nixel said weakly, scrolling through the database. According to this final report, dated just before humans mysteriously vanished from known space, they had developed something called casual enhancement protocols. It says here that their basic everyday modifications included planetary class strength, near invulnerability to conventional weapons, enhanced longevity, radiation immunity, vacuum survival capabilities, and the ability to subsist on virtually any organic matter. "What does it mean by casual enhancement protocols?" Dr. Crix asked, though he was beginning to suspect he really didn't want to know. "It means," Nixel replied, her voice barely audible, "that what we just witnessed Jake doing wasn't him showing off. That was him being careful." From somewhere deep in the ship, came the sound of what could only be described as a spaceship engine purring with contentment, followed by Jake's satisfied voice. "There we go. That should give you a lot better performance. Though you might want to upgrade your cooling systems. This thing was running way too hot." The three aliens sat in their destroyed research bay, surrounded by the smoking remains of their equipment, listening to their ship's engine perform better than it ever had in its entire operational history, and slowly came to terms with the fact that they had accidentally woken up something that could probably arm wrestle a black hole and win. "So Dr. Crix said eventually, should we tell him that he's probably the most dangerous thing in the known galaxy?" "Absolutely not," Commander Vorp replied, immediately. "If he doesn't know how terrifying he is, let's keep it that way." "Agreed," Nixel added. "The last thing we want is for him to start trying to show off." Jake Morrison returned to the research bay 45 minutes later, looking remarkably pleased with himself, and carrying what appeared to be several components of their life support system under one arm like they were groceries. He'd also somehow managed to find a coffee mug from somewhere, though none of the aliens could remember having coffee mugs aboard their ship. "Good news," he announced cheerfully, setting down the mechanical components with the casual care of someone handling delicate electronics instead of critical spaceship infrastructure. "I got your environmental systems running at peak efficiency. You were losing about 30% of your air recycling capacity due to some clogged filters. Also, your gravity generator was making this weird humming noise, so I tightened a few bolts." Dr. Crix stared at the components Jake had casually removed from their life support system, his scientific mind warring between fascination and abject terror. You dismantled our environmental controls." "Just the redundant parts," Jake said, with a reassuring smile that somehow made everything infinitely more terrifying. "Don't worry, I put everything back better than it was. Though I did have to improvise a few replacement parts. Your manufacturing tolerances are pretty loose." By improvised, Jake meant he had hand-forged new components from scrap metal, using nothing but his bare hands and what he considered gentle pressure. The aliens would later discover that their life support system was now operating at 340% of original specifications and would probably continue functioning perfectly for the next 1,000 years. Commander Vorp, who had been staring at his regulation manual for the past hour, like it might suddenly contain a chapter on what to do when you accidentally resurrect a galactic apex predator, finally managed to speak. "Jake," he said carefully, "we need to discuss your situation." "My situation?" Jake asked, settling into the reinforced chair that immediately began creaking ominous warnings about structural integrity. "You mean being the last human alive?" "Yeah, that's kind of a bummer. Though I guess it explains why I haven't gotten any text messages lately." The three aliens exchanged glances loaded with enough anxiety to power a small star. They had spent the last hour discovering that their passenger wasn't just dangerous, he was potentially the most dangerous individual entity in the galaxy. And he was treating his extinction-level capabilities like a minor inconvenience. "Actually," Dr. Crix said, choosing his words with the precision of someone defusing a bomb, "we're not entirely certain you are the last human. It's possible that your people simply moved on, perhaps to other dimensions, or higher planes of existence." Jake considered this possibility while absent-mindedly bending a piece of durasteel piping into what appeared to be a decorative pretzel shape. "Huh. That would make sense, I guess. Humanity was always pretty good at adapting to new situations, though it's weird that nobody left a note or anything." "Yes," Nixel agreed quickly, desperate to keep the conversation away from anything that might make Jake realize exactly how powerful he was. "Very inconsiderate of them. Not leaving a forwarding address." Unfortunately, Jake Morrison had spent 15 years working construction in an era when most heavy machinery was operated by enhanced humans, which meant he had developed the kind of situational awareness that came from working alongside people who could accidentally level city blocks if they sneezed too hard. And right now, his situational awareness was telling him that his three alien friends were acting very strangely. "You guys seem kind of nervous," he observed, casually crushing the pretzel-shaped pipe back into a perfect cylinder. "Is everything okay? You're not in trouble or anything, are you?" The question was asked with such genuine concern that it somehow made everything worse. Here was a being who could probably fight their entire military fleet single-handedly, and he was worried about whether they were having a bad day. "Oh no," Commander Vorp said quickly. "No trouble at all. Everything is perfectly fine. Absolutely nothing to worry about." His tone was so transparently false that it wouldn't have fooled a particularly gullible houseplant. Jake raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting to the kind of focused attention that construction workers developed when they suspected someone was about to do something dangerously stupid. "Okay," he said slowly. "But if you're having problems with other ships, or hostile aliens, or space pirates, or whatever, you know I'm happy to help out. I mean, you guys did save my life and all." The mental image of Jake helping out with hostile aliens caused all three researchers to experience what could only be described as synchronized heart palpitations. They had seen the footage of humans dealing with galactic warfare. They knew what Jake's idea of helping might look like. "That's very kind," Dr. Crix managed, "but we're not currently experiencing any hostile contact situations." "Good," Jake said, apparently satisfied. Then his expression brightened with the kind of enthusiasm that made emergency room doctors break out in cold sweats. "Hey, you know what? Since I'm probably going to be hanging around for a while, maybe I could help you guys upgrade some of your equipment. No offense, but your technology seems a little basic." "Basic?" Nixel squeaked. "Well, yeah," Jake said, gesturing around the research bay with the air of someone pointing out obvious design flaws. "I mean, your hull plating is way too thin for deep space operations. Your weapons systems look like they're designed to tickle rather than actually stop anything dangerous. And don't get me started on your engine efficiency ratios." What Jake was politely describing as basic represented the cutting edge of galactic technology, developed over centuries by the most advanced civilizations in known space. The fact that he considered it primitive was yet another reminder of just how far beyond their understanding human capabilities had evolved. "We appreciate the offer," Commander Vorp said carefully. "But our equipment is actually quite advanced by our standards." "Really?" Jake looked genuinely surprised. "Huh. Well, I guess different species have different approaches to engineering. But seriously, if you ever run into any real trouble, just let me know. I may not look like much, but I can be pretty useful in a crisis." The phrase "I may not look like much" coming from someone who had just casually renovated their spaceship while looking for a bathroom was so absurdly understated that Nixel made a sound like a deflating balloon. "What kind of crises are you experienced with?" Dr. Crix asked, then immediately regretted the question. Jake scratched his head thoughtfully. "Oh, the usual stuff. Reactor meltdowns, hull breaches, hostile boarding parties, that kind of thing. I was actually pretty good at handling equipment failures. My crew used to joke that I could fix anything with enough applied force and creative use of percussive maintenance. The aliens tried very hard not to think about what percussive maintenance might look like when applied by someone who could bench press a starship. Of course, Jake continued conversationally. That was back when I was just doing regular construction work. I never went through military training or anything like that. The guys who did the real dangerous stuff, like the Colonial Marines or the Peacekeeping Corps, they were way tougher than me. This casual revelation that Jake considered himself to be on the weak end of human capabilities caused Commander Vorp to make a noise that sounded like a combination of a groan and a prayer to whatever deity looked after career military officers who had made catastrophically poor decisions. Way tougher? Nixel asked faintly. Oh yeah, Jake said, with the pride of someone talking about respected colleagues. Those guys went through full combat enhancement protocols, neural warfare systems, adaptive camouflage, weaponized molecular manipulation, the whole package. I remember this one Marine, Sarah, who could literally punch holes through space-time if she really put her mind to it. Nice lady though, always brought cookies to the company picnics. The image of someone who could punch holes through space-time bringing cookies to office parties was so fundamentally bizarre that it broke something important in Dr. Crix's brain. He began making small whimpering sounds. But hey, Jake continued cheerfully. I'm sure you guys have your own military specialists who are just as impressive. What kind of enhancement programs do your warrior classes go through? We don't have warrior classes, Commander Vorp admitted weakly. No warrior classes. Jake looked confused. What do you do if someone attacks you? We file a complaint with the Galactic Peacekeeping Authority and wait for mediation. Jake stared at him for a long moment, his expression shifting through several stages of disbelief, before settling on what could only be described as parental concern. You file a complaint, he repeated slowly. Yes, and wait for mediation. Correct. What if the people attacking you don't want to mediate? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The three aliens looked at each other, suddenly realizing that their entire civilization's approach to conflict resolution assumed that everyone involved would be reasonable, rational beings who respected bureaucratic processes. That's never come up, Dr. Crix admitted. Jake's expression was now the one normally reserved for discovering that someone had been trying to perform brain surgery with a rusty spoon. Okay, he said carefully. Okay, I think I understand why you guys seem so nervous. You're not just researchers, are you? You're like the galactic equivalent of kindergarten teachers trying to do a nature documentary on tigers. That's actually not an inaccurate comparison, Nixel said miserably. Well, Jake said, clapping his hands together with a sound like a small explosion, looks like it's a good thing you found me then. Don't worry guys, I'll keep you safe. The promise was delivered with such sincere friendly confidence that it somehow made everything infinitely more terrifying. The three aliens sat in their destroyed research bay, listening to their ship purr with improved efficiency, and contemplated the fact that they were now under the protection of something that could probably arm wrestle a star into submission. And the worst part was, Jake genuinely thought he was being helpful. 3 days later, the research vessel Prudent Inquiry was drifting peacefully through the Kepler sector, looking from the outside like any other scientific survey ship going about its mundane business. This appearance was, however, somewhat misleading. The ship was now operating at levels of efficiency that violated several laws of physics. Its hull had been reinforced with hand-forged components that were stronger than anything in known galactic engineering, and its engines were producing a harmonic resonance that sounded suspiciously like a contented cat purring. Inside the ship, Jake Morrison sat in what used to be the research bay, and was now something that could only be described as the most comfortable living space any of them had ever experienced. Jake had spent the past 3 days fixing things, which involved rebuilding most of their furniture to human proportions, optimizing their food processors to produce what he called actual edible food, and installing what he referred to as basic safety improvements. The basic safety improvements included reinforcing every structural beam in the ship, upgrading their defensive systems to military specifications that didn't technically exist yet, and installing an early warning system that could detect potential threats from approximately half a galaxy away. Jake had accomplished all of this using spare parts, discarded components, and what appeared to be an intuitive understanding of engineering principles that most civilizations would need another 1,000 years to develop. Dr. Crix sat across from Jake, his notebook filled with observations that read less like scientific documentation and more like the desperate scribblings of someone trying to catalog the impossible. Jake, he said carefully. We've been monitoring long-range communications, and we've been wondering, what are your long-term plans? Jake looked up from the device he was tinkering with, which had started as their food processor and was now something that could apparently synthesize any known substance in the galaxy from basic atomic components. Long-term plans, he mused. Well, I guess I need to figure out what happened to everyone, maybe find some other humans, if there are any left. Why? It's just that, Commander Vorp interjected, consulting a datapad that now displayed ship efficiency readings that would make engineering professors weep with joy. We've been thinking. Our research mission was supposed to last another 18 months, visiting various archaeological sites throughout this sector, and we were wondering if you might like to come with us. The question was asked with the careful tone of someone making an offer they desperately hoped would be accepted, while simultaneously terrified of what acceptance might entail. Jake's face lit up with genuine pleasure. Really? You'd want me to stick around? I mean, I know I've been kind of a disruption to your research schedule. Disruption was such a massive understatement that Nixel actually snorted with what might have been laughter if it hadn't sounded so hysterical. Jake had turned their boring archaeological survey into something that resembled a combination of advanced engineering seminar and involuntary extreme sports experience. We wouldn't call it a disruption, Dr. Crix said diplomatically. More like an educational opportunity. That's really nice of you guys, Jake said, his smile warm and genuine. I'd love to help out with your research. It'll be good to have something useful to do while I figure out my next steps. Plus, you never know what we might find out there. Could be dangerous. The three aliens exchanged glances. After 3 days of watching Jake casually perform feats that redefined their understanding of what was physically possible, they were beginning to suspect that their definition of dangerous and Jake's definition of dangerous existed in completely different universes. Speaking of which, Jake continued. I've been meaning to talk to you about your security protocols. You guys are way too trusting. What if we run into space pirates, or hostile alien species, or corporate mercenaries, or any of the other nasties that tend to hang around archaeological sites? What other nasties? Nixel asked weakly. Oh, you know, tomb robbers, artifact smugglers, illegal salvage operations, territorial disputes, ancient automated defense systems that haven't figured out the war ended centuries ago, that kind of thing. Jake spoke with the casual familiarity of someone listing common workplace hazards. I mean, back in my day, you couldn't visit a single archaeological site without running into at least 3 different groups of people trying to kill you for completely different reasons. Back in your day, Commander Vorp repeated faintly, archaeological research was a combat operation. Not officially, Jake said with a grin. But unofficially, oh yeah, some of the most interesting historical sites were in pretty rough neighborhoods. I did a stint helping excavate a precursor ruin on Kepler 442b, and we got attacked by pirates, corporate raiders, and a pack of mutated wildlife, all in the same week. Good times. The mental image of Jake Morrison casually dealing with multiple hostile forces while doing archaeology caused Dr. Crix to make a small noise like a deflating balloon. But don't worry, Jake continued cheerfully. I'll make sure nothing bad happens to you guys. I've gotten pretty good at the whole protective detail thing over the years. Protective detail? Nixel squeaked. Sure, I mean, I'm not military trained or anything, but I picked up a few tricks working dangerous sites. Basic stuff like threat assessment, perimeter security, hostile negotiation techniques. Nothing fancy. Commander Vorp was beginning to understand that when Jake Morrison described something as basic or nothing fancy, it usually meant he was discussing capabilities that could reshape the strategic balance of galactic civilization. What kind of hostile negotiation techniques? He asked, immediately regretting the question. Oh, the usual. You know, politely asking people to stop shooting at you, explaining why their behavior is problematic, demonstrating the potential consequences of continued aggression. Jake gestured vaguely, as if these were perfectly normal diplomatic protocols. Most people are pretty reasonable once you take the time to explain things properly. The aliens had seen the video footage of humans explaining things properly to hostile forces. It involved a lot of very patient conversation followed by the complete and total dismantling of anything that could be considered a weapon, usually with the hostile forces standing there watching in stunned amazement. Jake, Dr. Crix said slowly, when you say demonstrating the potential consequences, what exactly do you mean? Well, you know, show them what might happen if they keep being aggressive. Maybe disable a few of their weapons systems, or bend some of their armor into interesting shapes, or pick up one of their vehicles and set it down facing the other direction. Just enough to get their attention and make them think twice about their life choices. Jake's description of just enough to get their attention sounded like what most civilizations would classify as an act of God's level intervention. The important thing, Jake continued, apparently oblivious to the expressions of barely controlled terror on his companions' faces, is to always be polite about it. Nobody likes being threatened, so you have to make sure they understand that you're not trying to hurt them. You're just trying to help them make better decisions. And this approach works? Commander Vorp asked weakly. Oh yeah, almost always. Turns out most people are pretty reasonable when you treat them with respect and demonstrate that violence isn't going to solve their problems. Jake's expression grew thoughtful. Though I guess it helps that humans have a reputation for being persuasive. Persuasive was apparently the human word for capable of casually dismantling entire military operations while maintaining polite conversation. Just then, the ship's long-range sensors began beeping with an incoming message. Nixel checked her console and immediately went pale, even by the standards of someone whose natural coloration resembled a traffic cone. Guys," she said in a voice that suggested she was about to deliver very bad news. "We're receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Archaeological Authority. They're asking about reports of unusual energy signatures in this sector." "Energy signatures?" Dr. Crix asked, though he was beginning to suspect he knew exactly what kind of energy signatures might have attracted official attention. Specifically, Nixel continued, her voice getting smaller with each word, energy signatures consistent with impossible engineering modifications and technology that shouldn't exist according to known physical laws. She paused, staring at her screen. "They're dispatching a fleet to investigate." The three aliens looked at Jake, who was still peacefully tinkering with their food processor and humming what sounded like an ancient Earth construction work song. "A fleet?" Commander Vorp asked faintly. 12 ships, military escort, ETA, approximately 6 hours. Nixel's scales had now gone completely white, giving her the appearance of a very worried ghost. "They're classifying this as a potential reality violation event." Jake looked up from his tinkering, his expression shifting to mild interest. "Reality violation event? That sounds serious. What's that about?" The three aliens realized, with the kind of clarity that usually comes just before very bad things happen, that they were about to have to explain to the most dangerous individual in the galaxy that a military fleet was coming to investigate him, and that this fleet was probably going to make some very poor decisions based on incomplete information. "Well, Dr. Crix said carefully, it seems that some of the improvements you've made to our ship have attracted official attention." "Official attention?" Jake's expression grew concerned. "Are you guys going to get in trouble? Because if anyone asks, I'll totally explain that you didn't ask me to upgrade anything. I just did it because I wanted to help." The idea of Jake Morrison explaining his actions to a galactic military fleet was so terrifying that Commander Vorp actually whimpered. "Jake," he said desperately, "when this fleet arrives, it's very important that you let us do the talking, okay? And maybe don't demonstrate any of your capabilities unless it's absolutely necessary." "Sure thing," Jake said agreeably. "Though if they start acting hostile toward you guys, all bets are off. I may not be military trained, but I'm not going to let anyone hurt my friends." And there it was, the single most terrifying sentence any of them had heard in their entire lives, delivered with such casual, friendly sincerity that it somehow made everything infinitely worse. 6 hours later, as they watched a fleet of military vessels approach their position, the three aliens sat in their impossibly improved research vessel, protected by someone who could probably treat their entire galactic civilization like a minor engineering problem, and contemplated the fact that they had accidentally stumbled into what might be the most significant event in galactic history. "So," Dr. Crix said eventually, watching Jake cheerfully wave at the approaching fleet through the viewport, "anyone want to bet on how this is going to turn out?" "My money's on Jake," Nixel said immediately. "Jake's not fighting anyone," Commander Vorp protested. "He's going to politely explain the situation and demonstrate why violence is not a good solution to interpersonal conflicts." "That's what I meant," Nixel replied. "My money's still on Jake." As the first military vessel began broadcasting standard identification requests, Jake Morrison cracked his knuckles with a sound like small thunder and prepared to have a friendly conversation with the nice people who had come to visit. The fact that his idea of friendly conversation might accidentally redefine the balance of power in galactic civilization was, as far as he was concerned, entirely beside the point. After all, he was just trying to be helpful. And somewhere in the depths of space, 12 military vessels full of well-trained professionals who had absolutely no idea what they were about to encounter, began what would later be remembered as either the shortest or the longest diplomatic incident in galactic history, depending on how you measured these things. But that, as they say, is another story entirely.